Here we go. Rock and roll. Sorry I'm late for people that were anticipating it. This was a random idea this morning. I had time and opportunity again. Forgive my coffee clearing my throat and my allergies. They're terrible. But I want to do this because I had time and I don't have very organized thoughts or a lot of inspiration this morning. So we'll see where it goes. What have I been thinking about and doing lately? I've obviously been thinking a lot about forgiveness. Hey, Charlie. I've been thinking about non-judgment. I've been thinking about anime. Hey. I've been thinking about, I believe you're famous kind of on this channel, correct? In a way. I think I'm right about that. And what did my buddy Cal say recently? So again, I don't know that my friend Cal is going to be able, Anthony, hello, is going to be able to talk with Jordan Daniel Wood, because we were going to try to talk with him. And I don't know, Jordan, if you ever watch these. If you watch these, God is absolutely good. Yes, and I'll maybe riff off that because what do we mean by good? So I was watching, well, before I go on to that little tangent and distracted myself, Cal was saying, he sent me this thing, which I put in the description. So it is a presentation, which I'd never heard of this guy on, essentially integral theory and spiral dynamics. And it's about awareness, or you could even say the awareness of awareness. That's actually a really good Rob Bell episode. I should go and check his podcast. His podcast is called the Robcast, and I don't listen to a ton of them. But truly, like if I say this to Paul all the time, I even commented on his most recent video. So Paul Vanderklay, where he was in Amsterdam and talking with the little thing that they have going there, the little kind of house church they have there. And hey, Mandy, welcome. Dolly, hello, everyone. And the pastor of this little church said something about people coming to his church. This is a little aside about Rob Bell. And he said, a lot of times atheists will come to his church. And the pastor said this, it's almost like a verbatim Rob Bell quote. There's a lot of verbatim Rob Bell quotes. Rob Bell out there has just like been throwing seeds out there forever, and then other people take them in and then they repeat them, even people who maybe think Rob Bell is a heretic, and they don't even realize it came from Rob Bell. But he said atheists will come to his church or something. He's like, I don't believe in God. And he's like, well, tell me who God is. And the atheist will, explain who God is. And the guy was like, well, I don't believe in that God either. which is a great way to go about it. He's like, we can start as atheists together and try to figure out what God is. Who is better, I would say, rather than what. But, maybe you can start at what. And Rob Bell is a heretic indeed. Well, he's one I like. So but that's a great way to stay in the question asking section. So Rob said that, and he had this podcast once on awareness of awareness. I think there's a few podcasts of his, because Rob Bell's a genius with words. He has a really great way with words. So awareness of awareness is a good one, which I think is one that he did with his son, which is really close to the Sherry reminded me of this. I don't think that I ever know this, but Sherry has said this before. It's a Master Eckhart quote, who's a legit person in the Western tradition, in the mystical tradition. But he said, "The eye with which you see God is the eye with which God sees you." I like that a lot. But anyhow, back to Cal, back to this link that I have in the description. It's on levels, and it's about integral theory, and a lot of it is about awareness. Which it also reminds me of this connection. Sorry, I'm a schizotypal person. All I see is just connections everywhere. So I'll talk about something and I see a connection and I go. Um, reminds me of Vervaeke was talking to, was it Vervaeke? Who was it? Somebody shared something with me that, no, it wasn't Vervaeke. Sorry, this is a local estuary thing, but it was essentially that awareness. What is the relationship between awareness and transformation, right? Because as I would say, as a Christian, and not even as a Christian, I would say a lot of religious traditions would say that mere awareness of the good or what's right or holiness isn't equivalent to actual holiness, you know? You could think of things in the New Testament like it's not the hearers of the word who are blessed or who are right or who are what I can't remember the exact translation, but the doers of the word who will be justified, who will be so the goal isn't to just hear the word. The goal is to be the word, to do the word. James says, "Receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls." That's a great verse. I mean, just really, what is that? What passage is it? I think it's in James 2. Um, but just meditate on that verse for a while. Just think about it. Receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your soul. I don't think the end is quite right, which is able to save your soul. But so receive with humility, with meekness, the implanted word. It's already there. It's implanted, which is able to save your soul. That could basically just be my my broad theology. Um, so all right, where were we at? Levels, consciousness, awareness. A lot of what integral theory talks about is an awareness and an awareness of awareness. But I'm not sure that mere awareness, like what is the relationship between awareness and transformation? Because I'm not sure that mere awareness is enough. I don't know what degree you can actually have a robust, full awareness. James chapter 1. Thank you. My mother, God bless her soul, uh, used to I did homeschooling on and off throughout my elementary school for various reasons. And those of you who know me will know the chaos, the somewhat chaos of my upbringing. But chaos and stability, it's both, which is what creates someone like me, somebody that's a both and person all the time. It was chaotic and stable. It was both. It was an antinomy, a unity of opposites was my upbringing, which is what makes someone like me. Um, and she had me memorize sections of scripture. Part of it is James 1. Maybe if I get crazy enough one of these mornings, I'll just start reciting what I can remember of James 1 from when I was in first grade or something. All right, let's throw some comments. Connections. I agree. Unities are important. I can get lost in them and kind of go crazy sometimes. It's just unity, and it becomes ungrounded. But thank you for that. God bless Nate. That's who I thought you were. All right, you outed yourself. All right. What a thank you for having that, for raising that man. He's such a beautiful man. Nate is truly one of my favorite people in this little corner. I love that guy dearly. This is obviously his whole project and channel, and he is okay with me just hijacking it for live streams. So, um, all right, back to it. Transformation and how that is related to awareness. Man, it's a difficult thing because I don't know. Man, there's a lot of things. So I'm seeing a mosaic of what that means. There's a line from bring in one of the Luke bingo things. We all have these bingo cards, but from the Ransom trilogy, it's from the first one, Out of the Silent Planet. But Ransom is he's arrived at this new planet, right? And so he is literally seeing an alien landscape for the first time. This is so Owen Barfield, by the way. Owen Barfield, I'm going to get to Owen Barfield because I don't know if I put the link in here, but we're going to be talking about Owen Barfield. And because I always am, because Owen Barfield, and I've said it since the beginning, the book Saving the Appearances is behind most of what's going on now in the evolution of consciousness and a lot of what I'm talking about. Major influences: Pete Rollins, Rob Bell, Owen Barfield, C.S. Lewis, the Lord Jesus Christ, the Bible. Um, so, uh, so he sees this alien landscape and he's having trouble figuring it out. Like he doesn't even know what he's looking at, right? He does and he does not. So this gets into seeing. And one of my big things, one of the first videos I made on my own channel, but it's very true. And one of my Luke-isms is seeing is not seeing. And this is a very Jordan Peterson thing. It's a very cognitive science thing. I've talked about this a lot, but AI robotics, trying to teach AI or robotics how to see is very hard because a lot of what seeing is inhibitory. You're eliminating things that you're actually perceiving with your rods and your cones and your eyeballs. Because in order to see something, you have to exclude things. Seeing involves a coincidence of opposites. It involves focus and it involves periphery. A lot of this is Polanyi, focal stuff and focal subsidiary integration and how all that works. I mean, there's a lot of things that goes into vision. It's a very simple thing on one level, but on an analytical level, it's complicated. So in order to see something, you have to inhibit most of what you're seeing. Because in order to focus on something, you have to exclude everything else. So to look at, whatever, my inhaler, because my asthma has been terrible lately. If I'm looking at this, I'm not looking at this, or I'm not focusing on this. I can't focus on this and this over here, my phone sitting over here. So in order to see, you have to inhibit a lot of stuff. And part of that is like Jordan Peterson's talked about that with apes, climbing around on trees and snakes that are coming. And part of what you're focusing here and you're swinging, but then all of a sudden your periphery, which is why you have to have your periphery, which isn't your focus, all of a sudden you'll see a flash in your periphery, or you'll see like eyes or a snake or something, and then all of a sudden you go and you focus over here because otherwise you're going to die. So seeing and not seeing go hand in hand. They're like the same thing. And it's something that's so basic and so intuitive, we don't realize we know it. And so when someone says something like seeing is not seeing, it sounds like garbly goop and just nonsense, but it's true. All right. Coming back to all right, I'm gonna put the link in a little bit, but what I wanted to talk about was I was talking about the levels thing, and then the Barfield thing, and saving the appearances. Oh, I want to read this quote from. So in my algorithm, all these stuff has been popping up in my algorithm because Paul is on hiatus over to Europe, and so he hasn't been putting out videos, and so I've been watching other things, and YouTube can't ever figure out my algorithm because I'm a flipping weirdo. I'm like, I'm not interested in that. That's boring. Anyhow, so this is from Saving the Appearances. I wish I knew how to like throw it up on the screen, but I don't. So Barfield says, I shall have succeeded very poorly with the opening chapters of this book if I have not succeeded in making one thing plain. It is only necessary to take the first feeble steps toward a renewal of participation. That is, the bare acknowledgement in beta thinking that phenomena are collective representations, in order to see that the actual evolution of the earth we know must have been at the same time an evolution of consciousness. Now that's a hell of a quote. And it's awesome. And this guy, what's so interesting is like Barfield is okay, so I dropped the C.S. Lewis thing. So so there's a lot in there. And if you haven't read Saving the Appearances, the basic levels of it, the basic outline from my understanding is that there are our ability to apprehend and to see, to experience phenomena it's got these levels to it. So Barfield calls them figurations, alpha thinking, and beta thinking. So what he's referencing in here is beta thinking. And so the way that I generally think of it is like a figuration is almost the raw phenomena in and of itself. You just see something, which is very related to the George MacDonald Lilith quote that I love so much, is like, the fact is no man apprehends anything, because and once he understands that you don't understand anything, that's his first tottering step, not towards understanding, but towards the capacity of one day understanding. I love that quote. And within that quote, in the context of that quote, he says, people think they understand things, but they don't understand it. They're just familiar with it. And so you have natural relations with it. But he said, don't confuse your familiarity with something with understanding. Those things are related, but they're not the same thing. So, like, we've talked about this before, the cup, like you think you understand a cup, but if you have to say, which is a philosophical thing, what is a cup? Man, shit gets hard, right? That gets complicated. Anything gets complicated when you say, what is it? Like, what is the thing? And you can talk about that at all these different levels, but philosophy is concerned with, well, Rollins would say that religion is concerned with the transcendental. He has this new podcast out, which I also put in the link, called What is Postmodernism? And man, it's good. I haven't got all the way through it. There's a few, if anyone goes and watches the video, I mean, my mode in YouTube is like, I make timestamps. I'm like, boom, what you said right here. And often I'll quote what you said and then I'll put my thoughts. I think YouTube should be a highly interactive platform. And often it's not. Most comments are like, I don't know. It's fine to just be like, great, thanks, good for what you're doing. Like, that's fine. And then people like that, and that'll get 1,000 likes. And I'm like, that comment doesn't help me understand anything at all. Like, how come we aren't liking the comments that are like further up and further ending the conversation? All right, I'm distracting myself. Saving the appearances, beta thinking, alpha thinking. Then I'll put the link in because I'm all over the place and somebody can ground me. But so figurations are like the raw phenomenon. It's familiarity with something. It's observing something. You see something. And then the alpha thinking is almost like the name association. So I think of it this way, like a baby. It's like a baby when they're first born, before their eyes can even focus. They're just swimming in like the oceanic oneness of whatever. The focal aspect of their vision and the periphery, they don't have either. They're figuring it out. They're growing into that. They can't even focus. And then all of a sudden with a baby, everybody's had this experience. The baby all of a sudden, focuses, and they focus maybe on your face, let's say, right? And you're just like, wow, that's so cool. Like the baby's actually looking at me for the first time. They see me. People know this, right? People have this experience. That's what that actually is focal subsidiary integration. They've put all these little pieces together and they see the mosaic, the fullness, the unity that is your face, and boom, they see it. They see the unity of your face, and then they can see. Before that, they couldn't see the unity. It was just a bunch of parts. I can't look. You guys have such great comments. I can't look at them because they distract me. So that's the figuration level. It's being able to see anything. Like, think of it outside of language. It's pre-verbal. Like, you could see a tree and not have the word tree. You could see it, but you see the unity of of everything, the collective representation of the tree. You see that. And then alpha thinking would be like the naming of it. Word association is often how I think of it, which isn't necessarily the thing in of itself, because the figuration, there's a pre-verbal aspect of it, but then there's also another level of, which is beta thinking, which is the thinking about thinking. And a lot of that is what the levels link is about, and integral theory. A lot of awareness has to do with thinking about thinking. And this is something that a lot of people do. It's actually what philosophy is. This is why most people find philosophy to be so hard, because philosophy is thinking about thinking. And you can do that at a lot of levels. It can get really meta or beta, beta thinking, as Barfield says, but a lot of that is truly about, I mean, that's the Barfield quote, right? That's what he said. Hezzy, my boy's in here. Phlebas is in here. So he says, the first step towards a renewal of participation, that is, so this is what it is, the bare acknowledgement in beta thinking that phenomena are collective representations. Now, the link, did I put that in here? If I didn't, I'll have to have Nate edit it, because the link to this review of Saving Appearances, there's one comment in there that I responded to in the bottom, which is awesome. I actually think the guy that did the book review doesn't understand Saving the Appearances that well. But the first commenter does. MJ, this guy MJ, whoever that is. It's so flippin' good. Nate, my boy, is here. He's showing out some Theory of WordPress. What is that, Nate? I know who that is. Anyhow. All right. I'm kind of all over the place, and There's other ways that I could go, but I'm gonna put an invite in here in case somebody wants to come in and look at some comments because I'm ignoring them so that I don't distract myself more than I do. I distract myself too much. So let's go up. Let's see. Love C.S. Lewis. Who doesn't? People should love Lewis, and people. Nate actually said this to me somewhat recently too. People don't realize how much of an awesome imagination C.S. Lewis had. Like people that are tend to be conservative in temperament, which is a lot of the world. Let's be honest, it's people that run most institutions on every side of the political and social sphere. Um, if they realized, like especially religious people, realized how radical C.S. Lewis was and the kind of shit that Barfield was saying, because the first comment, that MJ comment in that video, like what Barfield is saying is radical. He's actually saying that your participation in the collective representations is manifesting reality, which is pretty damn cool. But it's going to weird out, it's going to really wig out the people that are essentially some sort of implicit materialists. The religious people that are implicit materialists are going to freak out about that. All right. Is my wife religious? She is, yeah, she's religious. She is a believer, I would say. She is not at all interested in this. in like I start saying this stuff to her, I don't know, and she tries to pay attention. And then it's kind of funny because I've had these comments with my wife before where I'm just like, there are some people who find the things that I say interesting. She's just like, and I think she acknowledges that, but she has she's like a lot of people. A lot of the spouses and partners and people related to this little corner of the internet do not find philosophical and theological analysis and conversation interesting. And that's fine, I guess. But like I don't know, like what Barfield is saying, that it's fine and it's not fine, I guess I would say. Because right, like what Barfield is saying in that quote, I'm gonna read it again, because why not? Keep reading it. The more you gotta ruminate and meditate on this stuff to get it. The first feeble step towards a renewal of participation is the bare acknowledgement in beta thinking that phenomena are collective representations. And then you will see that the actual evolution on the earth that we know must have been at the same time an evolution of consciousness. I mean, hot damn, people. Consciousness, an evolution of consciousness is the same time an actual evolution of the earth. That's awesome. So Sophus, I would say, I don't know. There's this book called David Dark has this book. Oh, we have a friend. Okay, I'm gonna work through some of these comments and finish this. There's this book. What's up, Gage?
Hey, how you doing?
Hey. So there's this book by David Dark, who's this guy that I love. I actually bought all his books. I haven't read them yet. This is a common thing with me. I buy books and I don't read them. But it's called like Life's Too Short to Pretend You're Not Religious. He has another book called, I think this is his book. It's called Everything is Spiritual. Like, here's the thing. I think even, who's the guy that talked about the religious and irreligious? It's some social secular scientist who coined this term. Is it Haidt maybe? Irreligious, I think, talked about this. Everybody's religious. They just don't explicitly acknowledge it. I mean, this is a big part of what's going on in this little corner is like to have a highest value and to orient toward whatever you deem as the highest good that's your religion. Like, I mean, you're just not going to call it that. You maybe don't call it supernatural and natural, but part of that is because we're stuck in this divided, two-story universe that we've gotten to philosophically that's dumb. Anyhow, I'm going to read some comments. What up, Gage?
Hey, I just wanted to jump in and just kind of wanted to, I don't know, share some thoughts about like the idea of, you were talking about your wife.
Yeah.
And I feel similarly with my wife, like trying to, express some of these ideas and stuff in a way that um like connects. And
Hmm.
but those types of conversations have to that like they're in some sense good for me because they make me realize that like unless there's a universality to the ideas, then they're in some sense like still lacking. They're not refined because they aren't necessarily all the way like an idea in terms of its like high sense isn't fully manifested obviously until it's realized all the way down. And so I don't know, I'm interested to know what you think about that. And like it's kind of like this idea that unless we can fully realize anything, then it isn't yet real. And that's like some sense why there's so many conversations going on right now in this little corner about people going and trying to create communities like sustainable living and kind of separating from this crazy world and avoid the beast and all that. And I wonder if you know what I'm saying? And it's like I
Yeah,
have this issue that, although I totally understand that and they're thinking about their children and they're kind of trying to like figure out how to sort out this crisis, but at the same time I feel like unless it's universal and unless the solution is encompassing everything, we're in some sense settling.
yeah, yeah. Well, I no, I completely agree with what you're saying. And part of, I mean, people will repeat this in many different forms, and people will say, the good teacher, and I don't think of myself as a teacher, but like the good communicator, the good philosopher or professor ought to be able to communicate whatever ideas he's communicating in the classroom to like somebody at the bar,
Right.
right? And I think that's what you're saying. There has to be you said universality, but I would almost say like a resonance.
Mm,
Anybody that you're communicating something with, if what you're saying is actually valuable or real or meaningful, I would say, you ought to be able to communicate it in a way that resonates. And it's a really hard thing to do, because, um, man, like even for me with my wife, I mean, my wife's she's a very smart person, but she's not a philosopher. She's not wired in this way. And I mean, I'm weird in any group that you put me in, even in like this little corner or Grail country or whatever. Like, I think people know, they're like, I think Luke is saying something substantive that has value. And I think he's pointing to something that like I think is smart, but like I don't exactly know what he's saying. And so my wife, it's it's a hard thing to communicate that, but there should be resonances. A lot of my struggle with these things is I'm trying to, in a lot of my ideas, I'm trying to say these very big 30,000 foot view things almost as like succinctly as I can.
mm,
So like I really try to like get them down, and then because even if you watch like my time in this little corner, like I'm saying all the same stuff again.
right.
It's C.S. Lewis, like what you see and hear depends a lot on where you're standing. It also depends upon the kind of person you are. I've said that 1,000 times, and it's like a condensation of almost everything that I'm saying, and
Right.
it's very simple. You can get it at one level, but this is how it almost gets to what you're pointing at, because like it is a little bit of a universal thing, and it's kind of like what the Bible is. Like you can get the Bible at a superficial, elementary, basic level. Like
Right.
you can read or hear a parable of Jesus and just be like, oh yeah, cool. And like you can do that as like a fifth grader, but then you could write a tome of like the most esoteric, complicated philosophy about like what Jesus is really getting at in that like there's levels, and I don't know, like this it gets into Barfield a little bit, and then I'll shut up and see what you have to respond. But like I don't I don't know that we can truly have an evolution of consciousness and a participation in like what Barfield is saying if the evolution of the world itself is is related to the realization that we are participating in these collective representations, and that involves beta thinking in Barfield's structure. To some degree, philosophy and thinking about thinking and talking about these things at complicated abstract levels is necessary for the evolution of consciousness. I mean, I
Mm.
think that's what Barfield is saying. And so, like, at some level, it's like, okay, cool, we can keep things in a part of my struggle with, and this seems like condescending, and maybe I will just keep it at condescending, but like to say that like there's a and I have a condescending tone when it sounds condescending to myself when I say it, but like it's a term that I have, like smart dumb or pull parroting, and we even know this within classical education. To just repeat something that you've learned, like a definitional understanding of something, isn't understanding it. Like that's why I come up with a term like mammonistic knowing, because you're just repeating what you've said. It's actually like intellectual plagiarism. Like
Mm.
that's why a huge part of education is saying it in your own words. What does that mean in your own words? Because you don't understand it until you can say it in your own words. And and I don't know, like is it like a loving, is it a loving or a is it a reasonable thing to acquiesce to people who just want to live in a definitional mode of understanding without encouraging them some way to move into the, I don't know, the beta thinking level, which is going to be some degree of philosophy. I don't know.
No, those are some really interesting perspectives that I think are helpful to this because I think, you know, one thing that Neoplatonism, kind of in its raw form, has been criticized for is its lack of universality because of the
Mm,
sense in which it requires people to participate in that beta thinking, which, in a way that the way in which something like Christianity, the way that it kind of exists in the world doesn't necessarily require that, or maybe it ideally should, but it doesn't, in terms of the way that it manifests in a congregation, doesn't necessarily require people to participate in that type of philosophical thinking. Do you know what I mean? At least in the sense that people feel that they're participating in a faith community. I mean, obviously it does
right.
to some extent because of the way in which Christianity is in some sense built somewhat off of beta thinking to begin with, um, but definitely not to the extent that maybe we're talking at this level. But I guess so. That's been a criticism against it. But at the same time, it makes me, one of the statements Barfield makes is, in order to save souls, we have to first save the appearances.
Mm,
And when I first read that statement, it like floored me because you know I that kind of like in one succinct statement made me kind of realize the issue at hand and why so much of the things that you know the church has been trying to do in this buffered world has been so ineffective is because the it seems like we've just gone headlong trying to save people, in kind of a
mm.
salvific way without addressing this issue that Barfield is really trying to bring to the fore. And I like what you're asking because you're asking like there is obviously an inevitability that certain people aren't going to be attracted to this type of thinking, and there's a sense in which this type of thinking pulls them away from the really real, the groundedness. You know what I mean? I
Mm,
mean, like
yeah.
it's like it wouldn't necessarily be advantageous if Samwise Gamgee was up in his head thinking about these things. You see what I'm saying? Like we have to
Yeah.
remember that value of the Samwise Gamgee and his part to play in the role. But at the same time, like what you're saying is like Barfield's assertion, which I agree with, seems like this level of thinking has to be taken up. Like, how do you have to ascend out of the cave in order to go back into it? Like, I don't know. Those are just some thoughts based off of what you said.
Yeah. No, I think that's all really good. I think I, I mean, hopefully had a little bit of clarities or epiphanies just as you were talking, because I think, all right, so part of part of the evolution of consciousness is I think that we move. we move collectively into like a new way of seeing and knowing and being in the world. So like to divorce, I think what's hard about the current way that we're talking about is because we live in this divided world, so, a little bit, you know, not completely. We're maybe evolving out of it. I mean, I don't know. You know, we're moving into the uh, age of, what are we moving into? Not the age of Aquarius, the age of, I'm forgetting. I'm forgetting which
No, I think it is
mode.
Aquarius because we were just in
Is it?
Pisces.
Okay, yeah. So we are, I think, shifting and we're moving. At least I think we are. You see the I think I perceive a subtle shift happening and people are moving out of it. Like if you live in that divided world, because essentially what you were just talking about is like there's a way that you can participate in church um, in this certain way. This is kind of my critique of confessionalism, but that is essentially though groupthink. You're using all the same definitional understandings, but you don't even know what that means, and you're just repeating them in a pull parrot way, and that is a certain kind of participation, but it's not the kind of participation that Barfield's talking about, because
No.
the kind of beta thinking that he's talking about, that I'm talking about, can only be done personally. It's what do you think about this? You have to actually know what you think about this, which is why I've said before, all meaning is inherently personal, because this is why we're in the meaning crisis. Meaning actually is about what you think about something. You have to actually know what you think. You can't just repeat the groupthink pull parrot thing to know what you think about it. I've
Right.
said before, like, there's a difference between believing that you ought to think something and actually thinking it. Those are different things.
Right, right. And they're very
So, like,
easily confused, especially in matters of faith.
yeah, for sure. Which is why, like, I don't really have a fear of heresy in the superficial labeled thing, because I think I've realized what we were just talking about. There's a difference between believing what you ought to think and what you really think.
Mm,
There's maybe a lot of things that I think that I should think, and ways that I construe orthodox, confessional, um, true theology. Like it may be that I have a certain understanding of what those things are propositionally. Doesn't mean I believe them.
right.
You know, like even the demons believe in Shudder, and I think people just can't. They haven't figured out that those two things can be different things, which is why we live in this world that I think called divided man. And so I think we have to. It's a little bit of, I think we're in a mode of the evolution of consciousness where people have to, like, it's that, who's the the fear that the cave that you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. Who's the guy that wrote all the book on all the archetypes and stuff? Um,
Um,
heroes, the hero's
oh, Joseph
journey.
Campbell?
Joseph Campbell, yeah. So, I mean, he said that the fear that you hold, the cave that you fear to enter holds the answer that you seek. It's a very Jungian idea, but I think it's
Mm,
true. And I think that a lot of people are very, and temperament goes into this, but I truly think that in order for us to progress, people have to enter the cave of unknowing. They have to leave the confessionalist bounded safety of the tower, the walled castle, and enter the cave of unknowing, which is figuring out what do I really think, which involves this beta thinking, this thinking about thinking.
mm,
And yes, like I'm not trying to, if people watch the post, I put it in there, the postmodernism thing in there. Peter Rollins talks about somewhere at the beginning of it. I mean, he's essentially talking about saving the appearances. I have no idea if Peter Rollins is familiar with Barfield, but what he's talking about is that. And it's essentially what honest postmodernism is, because they talk about the beginning. He essentially studied post-structuralism, which is postmodernism, but they talk a lot about like what is postmodernism, and what postmodernism essentially is saving the appearances. I mean, it's really what it is. It's that
right.
you can never totalize and absolutize your interpretation, your understanding, your whatever to this absolute level, because then you concretize it and you no longer maintain this iconic relationship with your understanding, because that has to constantly be evolving. Otherwise, you monarchical vision things, you make yourself God, and you absolutize your understanding of something. Because essentially that's what I think. I'll shut up. What I think, that's where I think we're headed. But you have to enter that cave of unknowing to figure out what you actually think about something, and leave the groupthink to figure out what you actually think about something, because that's how you're actually participating in the collective representations. That's how the world will actually change into
Right,
final
right.
participation. It
Right,
won't
because
change
that's
otherwise.
how new stuff is being brought into out of the darkness and into the
Yes.
real. There's no other actually way to do it other than through the individuals doing that within their consciousness. You just stagnate if the group think remains. And when you were talking about it in the context of like heresy, it reminded me of the classic Jordan Peterson that you know in order to think you have to risk offending people. Similarly, in a theological current, in order to think you have to risk being a heretic.
Or offending yourself, perhaps.
Yeah, right, your own personal, right. And it seems to me that, like, people who do that wisely, you know they end up kind of being a double-edged sword to the world, because they in some sense, their choice to do that individually, they may not even trying to be causing a big um disruption, but everyone's forced to now confront with this new thinker who's thinking independently. And you think about all the
Hmm.
theologians and stuff who have done that, right? It's like you have this
Absolutely.
stagnating faith, and then all of a sudden someone kind of like, and you can usually identify, if you've learned how to do this well, you can usually identify the difference between someone who's really just trying to be an enemy of the faith versus someone who cares so deeply about the faith that they're trying to bring up new material out of the unknown and transform the faith and progress it. And when you do that, it's like everyone kind of scrambles. And it seems like that those are always moments of great transformation. And like, I know, I think it was Mathieu on Twitter that tweeted recently that said, like, the prophet comes out of the dirt when the religious establishment has stagnated. And so, like, it reminds me, get that image of like stones being raised up, like,
Mm.
Christ just being, when something is needed, it comes forth in a response to something. um and I think, I I don't know, I think, that kind of helps bring it down, as opposed to, like, thinking about it so philosophically. I wonder if, so, like, just a little background about me is I'm
Yeah.
learning to become a therapist. And I I'm partly doing that because I feel that um the intimate dynamic involved in an individual therapy session with people that who are obviously not, I mean, obviously some of them might be, but the vast majority aren't going to, maybe be philosophically inclined in the way that, like, this
Yeah.
little quarter is, obviously. But in this session, I have this opportunity with them where they're presenting, real world problems. And I'm interested in the dynamic between, working on people in the real life, practical, kind of grounded issues, and like weaving these philosophical currents in a way that ends up affording them more reality and affording them help. And that this is in some sense like that midwifery
Hmm.
aspect. And so it's not just the midwifery of people, the way normal therapy might be done, in the sense that, okay, we've lowered your symptoms, we've taught you some coping skills, or, we've tried to explore your past. It's actually, in all those things may be true at the same time, but it's actually helping people to awaken to themselves in the way that you were describing, of starting to emerge out of the group think and think critically. And the reason why I feel like therapy is such a cool dynamic for that to be explored is because, what other opportunity in the world do you have where people are coming to you looking for, guidance over practical issues, and where you kind of have this intimate environment, and it's like this thing that's separate from these, like, cultural wars and like all the types of other
Yeah.
dynamics you can have with people. It's like this
Yeah.
isolated space. and obviously there that lacks something in the way that it then will need to be reintegrated into the whole. But I feel, the experience that I've had so far in my internship and doing that as I'm really seeing some cool things take place. So it's been encouraging to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally true. I have feedback for some reason. Where's that happening? There it went away. But yeah, so I love that because I love therapy and Abby is saying so, like positive language about therapy. Yay. I I don't yeah, therapy is like so why that's a great question in light of the last live stream because Flevis was in here and a lot of people were in here and a lot of the um I think I used the term like because this is something I was wanting to talk about, self-love or self-forgiveness or even therapy. It can have a very negative connotation. And even people, Phlebas is a great guy. Chad has a very big aversion to that kind of language. And I'm wondering why can you think of therapy like the way that you were just describing it as a way of getting out of the I don't know, the blindness of maybe like what you believe you ought to believe and what you actually believe. So getting out of that false man into like the real of where you're actually at and having therapy actually help to enter into that unknowing because that's obviously what you're doing. Why do you go to a therapist? Is because they're going to help you to see things you don't currently see so that you can
Right,
change. Like that's
right,
the whole damn point of therapy.
right, right,
So
right.
like so, like, why can it be construed that way, which is very positively, and why can it be like when people talk about moral therapeutic deism or something, the current Adam Smith, I think, or Christian Smith, sorry, not Adam Smith, that's economics. Christian Smith understanding of like Protestant evangelical modernist God, he called it moral therapeutic deism, right? But
Mm,
therapeutic there is considered negative, like it's a negative connotation.
right.
But why do we have positive and negative connotations to therapy, do you think?
I think I think part of it is that therapy is in some sense in its modern form is very new. Like, it's about 100 years old as far as, this traditional talk therapy technique. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
people in religious communities, in some sense, feel that therapy is this like hollowed out replacement for the type of relationship that a person should have with their religious leader. And I don't even necessarily disagree with that in it, but like at the same time, you know, like there's a reason why people aren't going to their religious authority in that regard. And whether that's justifiable or not is in some sense not
Yeah.
really the question that is important. Like I think like even the field of psychology kind of emerged as in the beginning of the 20th century as like a means of trying to like justify philosophy through
Mm.
scientific enlightenment ideas. And so it's like, oh, here we can measure our philosophy now. And like, obviously, this is a really reduced view. This is a reduced view of psychology, but like, it's so representative of that time where everything had to be quantified, even though obviously the entire scientific enterprise is undergirded by philosophy. So it was kind of a silly thing, but
What? How dare you?
right. So I don't know. I feel like as far as why people have negative perceptions of therapy is I think part of it is that we we kind of are responding to um a lot of different issues in therapy, and it's been taken up in so many different ways. Like I think I guess partly for me why I've had a positive view about it is obviously because of my own personal experiences in therapy, but also like to me, as Vervaeke talks about the wisdom famine and kind of all of these issues and stuff like that. I'm constantly been struggling to find practical ways to involve myself in a way that like provides like a holistic place in my life, that and therapy seems like a way where that transformation of the individual can happen in a way that is very akin to um, the relationship you'd have with a philosopher of some sort, and you're also exploring that with them. You know what I mean? It's like that's why I'm really like attracted to the kind of existentialist therapy, you know, kind of more Viktor Frankl kind of idea. I mean, one of my favorite theologians is Paul Tillich, because I think Tillich gets so right the
Gang,
human
gang.
element of interaction, and I mean,
Yeah.
he has this little book of, it's a collection of sermons called The Eternal Now, and these sermons are just so utterly like deep and like have such a strong philosophical theological basis, yet hit to the human real lived experience so deeply at the same time. And that's, I guess that's in some sense like what I'm envisioning for what therapy could be for certain people. Yeah, I don't know. I'll shut up now.
Yeah, that's good. So Gavin and Abby, if you guys have thoughts, I mean, yeah, money with therapy is hard because like that would be my
Yeah.
addition is
Yeah.
if my goal with anything with philosophy, and you don't have to use a lot of big words. The goal should always be to have everyone speaking the truth as best as they can as they currently understand it. And I think what's great is like you don't have to use big words to do that. Often that can be a distraction. I mean, I think
Right.
it's part of why I thought about going back to school for philosophy at one point. It would have been a disaster because I'm an anarchist and I hate institutions. But but and I hate bureaucracy. But also I feel like most of it's bullshit. Like most of the things that they don't actually believe the stuff they're saying. Like I like talking about ideas. I want to speak the truth, but often, honestly, that's why I like came up with the term smart dumb, because most intellectual conversations to me feel like people just throwing egos around, but not speaking truthfully. And like, who cares? Like, who cares? It's so
Right.
dumb. Anyhow, sorry.
No,
Abby, Cameron.
these comments that are coming in are really good because I think the financial piece of it is really, really important. I think the whole idea of
Yeah.
paying for a friend is a serious issue. And I honestly, I've been talking with people who kind of think similarly, who are in this field. And I mean, it's interesting to me how, first of all, I think one thing right off the bat is that I think the idea that we treat like mental health and therapy in general is kind of like this, just trying to solve the individual's problem and not realizing that like mental health in some sense is more of an issue of the common good, largely because of the ways in which mental health negatively affects the entire community. It A lot of these aspects are extremely contagious.
But
If
what
you have
is mental
somebody
health?
what's that?
What is mental health? How do you know when you see it or feel it?
I mean, mental health is not a good term. That's the most important aspect. Mental health is a really bad term, right?
Is it?
And
Why,
part of,
why is it a bad term?
because there's too many things intersecting at one space. I think is a huge part of it. I mean, even what I was just trying to talk about is the ways in which mental health exists kind of in the healthcare world, in the way that intersects with some of these meaning crisis issues is already problematic because neither of those two communities really oftentimes have the same language to describe kind of similar phenomena. So
Do you
that's
think,
definitely why it's problematic, I think, at least at one
I
level.
mean, are there people who think they have a healthy mind? And would those people be the people to go to ask what mental health is?
I don't.
Yeah, yeah.
Have y'all ever experienced unconditional love? And
That's a great
would that be a
question.
healthy mind? Would that be a healthy mind when you're experiencing unconditional love?
When you're
And
experiencing unconditional love, would that be a healthy mind?
right.
I think part of why that question is even confusing is because I mean, I think we're still in this world of the divided mind where it's like ideas, reality, supernatural, natural. And so like mind, whenever anybody says mind, we're automatically thinking like the not real world, you know?
Right, right.
And so like when you say, does somebody have a healthy mind experience, is that the same as unconditional love? I would say, yeah,
And so
because that's
perhaps
the real.
the mind has to be in service to a heart that has unconditional love. And when the mind is the master, then it's not healthy.
Yeah, maybe like the left-brained ego kind of, encapsulated mind that thinks they understand things. Because then automatically, that's like what Rollins was talking about. You're in that world of totalizing your interpretation or your understanding, and it's the closed circle of the serpent to make it about Tom Berg and Meditations on the Tarot, nod to Nate, Grail Country.
And then there's some situations that it's harder to have unconditional love. And so I wonder, is it appropriate in every situation, or should you be flexible and adapt depending on where you're at? So like even coming up with a standard might be difficult, because a standard for me, like right here, would be different than the standard for me in the jungle with the tiger about to get me, right? What's a healthy mind, right?
Yeah, so Gage, I want your thoughts, but I want to throw this out too. I mean, we don't have to go down exactly to answer this question, but so in a number of years here, I'm going to be an empty nester, and I've been an at-home dad mainly for a long time, and I'm trying to think about my education, training, and degree, which I haven't used for years, in chemistry, which I have no desire to do. So I've thought about, my wife and I have been game planning like what I can do as a career. But so part of this, the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is connected to a lot of what Chad was saying, what Phlebas was saying, money, and connecting money with this, and litigation and lawyers and insurance. And I mean, this is like what we do in the modern American capitalistic world, right? All this stuff is connected to money. So like if you go to therapy, you're paying them for money. You're so this is something I've thought about, like what am I good at? What am I passionate about? So like this kind of thing, or even therapy. Like I love talking to people who have a desire to get past the bullshit of ego, whether that's philosophically or emotionally or personally or therapeutically or whatever, and talk about what's real. Like getting to that place of absolute humility and vulnerability. But like the question always is then, like for me, like something my wife often says, because she's much more practical than me, and to some degree, like the worker is worth his wages, like St. Paul, if you should pay someone for the work they're doing. But in this capitalistic society, like how do you what is the relationship with like vocation and money and getting paid for stuff, and how is that related to therapy? Because I would argue that as a rule, again, this is as a rule, not as there's exceptions to it, is therapy and psychology and drugs and psychiatric all of that has become polluted by mammon. It's become polluted by making money. Like it's messed with all of it. And so it turns Christ into Antichrist. All these good intentions just pave the road straight to hell. And so I don't know, how do you avoid that? I don't know. Like that, I would think that inhibits unconditional love as a rule.
I absolutely agree. And I think therapy, this is the issue in some sense that I've been grappling with for a long time, is that I don't agree with the way in which therapy is implemented into the world. I think it's exactly what you just described. Its existence in the capitalist frame deprives people of life and love and true relationship, and it acts as an artifice in the way that everything else in our world is acting as an artifice.
Which is
And
gross.
but I also hold the position that, and this is kind of like what we were talking about, Luke, at the beginning, about this kind of idea of going and creating out your own community of sustainable living, kind of in the, to try and escape the beast, so to speak. I've thought very deeply about that, and I highly respect people who end up making that decision. But at the same time, I ultimately think I'm very motivated by this type of pattern I see of learning the wisdom necessary to take evil into oneself in a way that doesn't allow it to destroy oneself, so as to transform the world through it. Like I really love the way that theme is explored in the Dark Knight trilogy, because Batman basically, the only way he can in some sense revivify Gotham is in some sense by doing that. He has to participate in all of the negative aspects without it consuming him. And all the types of characters, you have these foil characters like Harvey, who in some sense like lets that aspect consume him. But it's in some sense because he ignores the evil and kind of doesn't like truly deeply understand it enough. And like, I don't know if you remember at the end of The Dark Knight, he uses sonar to like spy on everybody in the city to catch the Joker. And it's like, but he also in some sense, he gives it over to someone who he trusts, who is wise. And then once it's done, he destroys it. So like just using that as an example of the way in which techne has to be used in a way that, I don't know, I guess I'm just exploring an idea in that regard. I have to run to work, but it was really good talking to you guys. And
thanks for popping in, buddy.
Yeah. See you around.
Yeah, have a good one. Abby, hit us up with some brilliance.
I guess I agree with what Gage just said about like, I think you can't, therapy isn't inherently evil because it involves capitalism and money. Like it's a thing that's positioned within that system. And that's kind of the way that almost anything has to manifest in this present world. I mean, it's kind of like I was thinking of just the same debate with physical healthcare. Like you get a lot of corruption in that, but it's also still can be good, but also it can be bad. And there's also a lot of the same kind of debate. And I guess each person has to decide, well, speaking of thinking for ourselves, each person has to decide where do they fit in that and what's healthy for them. And for me, I happen to have a really good therapist who I think is kind of an example of doing good even through the kind of like you have to pay for it and stuff and all of the bureaucracy and things. He has pro bono slots and stuff, and he about paying for friendship, I don't know if I would describe at least my therapy as that. It's not, because it's a professional relationship. It's not a friendship. There's like some measure of distance. And for me, at least, that's helpful. A friend couldn't therapize me in the same way as a therapist. Like, I don't know how to describe it other than there's like, but so it's definitely different from just paying for somebody to be your friend. Like that's if you have to do that. But I get value from therapy beyond that. And I also am spiritually involved, and I definitely get something different out of my therapy, which again, my therapist is good. I've heard horror stories. There are horrible ones out there in all kinds of ways. But I get something different from it than I get from like spiritual stuff. I guess I, in my personal life, have found like the whole framework of what do you say, like the medical scientific language around mental health or around the way our minds work to be helpful enough and to fit my life in a way that helps me. Like the idea of, hi Sherry, the idea of like processing trauma and obviously dissociative disorders and why it is made to fail. I don't know, man. I'm doing pretty well. I'm helped by it.
I think what Nate's saying though is like the therapist has to love you.
Yeah, and I think my therapist definitely, I have a lot of compassion from him, and he's definitely not doing it for the money. And yeah, there's a lot of compassion, which is extremely important for me because that's, yeah, I don't know. Ethics of beauty. Sorry, I'm really rambly today. But ethics of beauty.
That's not allowed. That's not allowed on my live streams, rambling.
Yeah, ethics of beauty. Ethics of beauty, I think, does a decent job of talking about it. I liked what they were saying. And as far as I remember, they were okay with therapy. They just thought that it should be like beauty first and focused on, instead of focused on dragging up your traumas and like putting them out and like overanalyzing them, focused mostly on reconnecting the individual into like blessing in the Lord of Spirits sense of being connected properly in the community. And honestly, that's what my therapist does focus on. Like, we talk through past traumas because it's necessary, but the goal is to find the life and feed it and take the good and reconnect it. And I think it's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean, I think a lot of the reason that therapy is so needed, is because people largely do lack friendship, lack community, lack intimacy. I think what everyone is saying can be true. And a lot of people are saying therapists are the new priests. I mean, that was traditionally the role of the pastor, was like
I just
the
don't think
wise
I
older
don't think a
elder.
priest. I guess for people who've experienced, like, I guess I'm coming from a place where I've experienced like a lot of deep trauma, where even my therapist kind of like, oh, okay, what do we do here? Because like, given, and maybe what you're saying is right, like, we need therapy because we lack community, but damn, what am I trying to say? Like, given that my youth was put with such deep trauma, even if I had friends in community now, I don't think it would be too much of a burden on them to expect them to do all of they couldn't. I don't think they could heal that. Having a professional who deals with just kind of working through that and getting me back to a healthy place so that I can be in a community is necessary for me. It would be too much to put on a friend, like, all of this. Like, I don't think that they could.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, technically, but it would be like hard. And
Well,
also,
and maybe it's just, it's just an acceptance of where we are, because like, if you can sit here and say, like, if we had better community, and you can maybe work toward that end, but we don't. And
yeah,
so like, and
exactly.
and
Exactly.
everyone's going to therapy,
Yeah.
or some
I've
are, and so like, it's just where
I've
it
used
is.
GPT-4. GPT-4 has been a pretty good therapist for me this last year
I can see
because
that, Gavin.
I'll take what someone says and I say, this person said this, I don't know what they mean. And
Yeah.
then I could go through it. I even took different people on YouTube channels, and I was able to say,
Uh-huh.
just describe each person's behavior. And I'll say, person A did this, person B did this, person C did this. And I'll start to be able to build out like a profile of, oh, this is who that person is. And it was able to predict what they would do in certain situations. And so, like, for me, I was able to use GPT-4 to try to be able to communicate better, to be able to listen better, to understand what's going on in other people's minds. Now I have a wife who's a really good therapist, and I have a few friends that's been calling me up and are like counsel. But I've talked to a few people recently, and I've listened to some stories where it's like people will avoid. You're asking this underlying question is like, why is there an aversion to therapy? And it's like I've listened to stories where the wife of the pastor doesn't want to, um, you know, feels like they feel shame, right? Because they have something going on. Or the pastor. I heard a story of a pastor who felt shame, and because like I've got this thing on my wrist, it's, Psalm 147:3, like God heals the brokenhearted. And so I think there's something connected in this where, people, want, I guess, we want to feel like we're healthy. And so then we can have blind spots, like, and hallucinate or delude ourselves about our own healthiness, or we feel shame, and we avoid like reaching out for help to others or confessing to others what we're dealing with. And so to me, that's like the answer that I have for the question, like, why are people, therapy averse or something, right? Those are some of the things that were coming to my mind earlier when that question got asked.
Yeah. Or
Because they're
people.
afraid of being vulnerable? Is that the
Different.
short version?
Well, my thing was I was just delusional. Like I'm tough. I'm perfect. I don't need anything. There's nothing wrong with me. And but there's other people who feel shame. It's like, if I go ask for help, then it's going to do something to my image. And so you have a lot of people who are putting on a fake, like they're not being honest, and they're pretending to be healthy when they're not. And they know they're not, but they're also have this feeling of like a fear or shame of how they would be perceived in making themselves vulnerable, and what not just to them, but maybe their spouse, or some, the people around them. So it's complicated for why people are averse to therapy. So I put those in two categories. There's the Gavin category of being arrogant and having delusions, and then there's this other category of people. So you can miss the mark in different directions, and that's kind of the two ways to miss that mark of being able to, confess what you struggle with and seek help from others because it's too much to carry by yourself.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing because, or you have someone like me who feels like, I mean, I spoke about this once there was a Randos United video we did a long time ago called Emotional Manipulation. And one of the things that I said in there is that what you just said is true of a lot of people, but I'm almost the opposite, where like I will use extreme transparency and vulnerability. I can use when I'm being unwell as like it's not even like a power move, but it's almost like I'm beyond the place of where, because to me that seems superficial. Like if you have you want to put out this false sense of security as strength, I'm just like, whatever. Like I'll go Sigma male and I'll just do like extreme vulnerability and transparency is like the most biggest strength. But then the problem is like, because I'll just make this very personal. So like my wife is she's not perfect. She has her problems, but like she's very mentally stable and well. And part of that's just like temperament and family and a lot of stuff. Like she's just like a very high functioning, stable person who's like, she said something to her, to a friend, a local friend recently, another mom who was just like, sometimes you just feel like the buoy for your whole family and like everyone's just trying to like drag you down into the waters, because that's how it can feel, because we have 3 teenage kids and me, so it's like my wife has 4 children, and she's we've talked about before, because like I've tried to go to therapy together because I'm a big fan of all this stuff, but then what we kind of were talking about recently was just me going to therapy, because I'm obviously an external processor and I have like and everything objectively, right? As if there is a thing. Objectively, my life is great, but I can still have a lot of issues because I'm a neurotic, you know? And so I've thought about going. And one of the things I'd really like help with is I complain a lot. I'm just like, it's annoying. Like I'm a big complainer. And
Well, I think the first thing is the thing that you said last week or whenever it was about about having a hard block and not being able to show the same compassion to yourself as other people. I think if you have that going on, it kind of poisons everything from my experience.
Well, I also have that. Like I'll complain a lot and see all these problems and then feel bad that I'm doing that, and it's just like it's a terrible cycle. But I do have this habit. It's like, think of it as like generational sins. I'm kind of inherited from my father, because something my father used to do. He's a very hardworking person. So this is like a direct inheritance from my father. He's literally the hardest working person I've ever met and know. And part of that is because he had to, because I grew up very poor. He was very in debt. He worked like 2 jobs, slept like 4 hours a night, and just like physically working his butt off. He was like a iron connector in Wyoming. So he would like, he's like those guys in those pictures over New York that are just like on the I-beams. Like that's what my dad did before they had like safety harnesses and stuff. And then he was a cattle rancher and a carpenter. So like he's this very hardworking person. I have many stories. And but then like he's just so amped up and like working so hard. And then when other people weren't helping what he thought adequately or picking up the slack, like I would live 6 or 7 miles outside of town, and then we'd drive to town to work, and I worked with him most of my high school and life. And then he would just monologue and rant to us like the whole drive to town about how hard he was working and how his kids were not like helping and working as hard as him and stuff. And so like, but like that pattern is just deeply within me. So like I do the exact same thing to my kids, because me and my wife are like very hardworking people. Like I'm not phoning it in. I mean, you could argue I am just sitting online. This isn't a judgment of you talking to people, but this is like my outlet. This is like, I don't know, this is a passion project, I guess. And But like when I get off of here, like I have a hard time even reading books because I'm like, I can't take the time to just sit down and read a book because there's too much stuff to do. Like there's all these things that I see undone. But then I get stressed out about it. And then when the kids like aren't doing what they're doing, then I just rant at them like my dad did.
Are you able to like watch your mind doing all this and like,
Yeah.
Are you able to watch it?
Yeah. I mean, yes, to some degree, but yet, we're seeing patterns. And so to some degree, the actual levels video that's in here talks about this because there's a certain level where it's thinking about thinking, and then you get outside of this phenomenon, and then you step outside of this phenomenon, observe it. So like I can do that to some degree. Like I see myself doing it sometimes in moments, and that is helpful. That's like an awareness of awareness thing. But yet I feel like I feel like I could benefit from a good therapist saying like, what are very practical ways for me to stop doing this pattern? Because what I tend to do, this is my evangelicalism, it's the gospel of just try harder. I observe myself doing that, and I'm like, well, just stop doing that, and just try harder to stop doing that. But like that doesn't work. That just is shaming and guilting.
Yeah.
So I've thought about doing that, but this is to make it more practical. But then
you haven't been able to like quiet your mind, like to learn how to quiet your mind.
Maybe. And again, like that's where I could say like, well, yes, I could maybe establish patterns of like meditation and contemplation and daily prayer and
time
stuff
out, time out is so big. I'm trying to encourage the kids, like when we do time out, this is not a punishment. This is a tool. Like being able to do a time out, man, it's powerful. It like I'll be angry, and I know that if I act with anger, I'm going to potentially hurt somebody and regret what I'm doing. And then I can take, with practice, I've gotten to a point where I can take a breath in, do a timeout, and then approach it, and it didn't start out that way. And I've made mistakes, and I hope I don't make any more, but and I might, but it's being able to do that timeout. That's a really good skill that I'm trying to teach my children, and they haven't learned. They're not good at it at all.
Well, part of that is like we like begets like is something that I say a lot. And so it's like with my kids, I am in a lot of ways my dad and they are me. And this is the problem with generational sin is like it's really hard to unlearn, especially very deep-seated habits and patterns. And so like I can sit there and get mad at my kids. And it's like, you complain all the time. And I'm just like, well, that's because that's what I do. And so like if you could really embody that timeout thing and calm and peace and forgiveness and all those things, then like slowly, I think over time that would really affect your children. But it's a hard thing. And so what I was going to say is like, I looked into a therapist. I reached out to a local buddy who is a therapist who Abby, you were saying like, I think is very cognizant of all this stuff and the structure and has very intentionally not set his stuff too high and tries to do all those things. Like he's an incredibly ethical guy. But then he recommended this therapist who was like, I mean, I don't know. It was something like $200 an hour or something. And they work outside of insurance. And I was just thinking like, and so then we had this long conversation of number one, like whether or not someone could afford that or figure out a way to afford that. Like that is just like such a, like that's a crazy amount of money.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so then it's just
within insurance.
You're right. And so then it's just like, and I appreciate not going within the insurance model. I think there's good reasons for that, but then it's like, then it becomes like only like super wealthy people can afford insurance, can afford therapy, which isn't really the goal. And so then because it basically got to the point of just like my wife then, because this was her advice, she was just like, maybe you just need to have somebody that you go and pay just to complain to, and they can help you figure that out. Cause like, I don't think that's good for our marriage. For me to be that person.
The GPT-4. Try it out.
And so, yeah. And so I like looked into it, and then she was just like, actually, we're not doing that. She's like, we could go on like a few dates a month. And she's like, and I could just try to, and like, she's like, for that amount of money, I think I'll just listen to you complain to me.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I
Uh,
love it.
so I don't know. That was the
Mhm.
practical takeaway for that. But I appreciate the timeout advice. I mean, that's good. I will try to implement that because I think it's yeah, just stop. You have to stop yourself when you're like in
Well,
that mode of just like
my
in the rut,
my
doing the
pastor,
pattern.
like he
Stop.
says every morning, like he goes and he like sits with his Bible, he lights a candle, and it sounds like he spends like an hour, talking to God, and I've heard a pastor Tony Evans talk about how like he'd say like Jesus would go spend time with the Father, maybe 4 or 5 hours before he even started the day, and so he was prepared for the day,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, and that's, some people might feel like, especially like the pastor's wife, they might feel some shame because it's like, well, maybe if I spent more time with God, maybe it would heal my heart and I'd be more prepared. But that's a timeout, like a
Yeah.
timeout
No,
is,
for sure.
Yeah, but Jesus
Prayer
didn't
can
have a
be a
9 to
timeout.
5.
he didn't.
He didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was God, right, Sam?
I mean, I think
Uh,
about this because, like, I fall short all the time on like the way that I think I should be, and the direction I've gotten from this is um has been really helpful. Because, like, I like the question that Gavin's asking: do you ever observe yourself when it's happening? Like, have you ever had this happen where you're about to get into an argument with, like, let's say your wife or something, and like this the good conscious mind says, Chad, just stop. Like, this is stupid. You're walking down this stupid path. And then the other part of me is like, no, 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 no. F that, dude. This needs to
yeah.
happen now. And then I'm like, dude, no. Like, that you're gonna feel like shit afterwards. Just stop. And then, like, the temper tantrum is like, no, like, I need to do this now. And then I do it, and then I'm like, son of a bitch. And it never has ever, I've never once ever felt good from it, ever. And
Next time,
like,
maybe.
and right. And it's getting a lot better
Oh,
where
God will give
I
you
do it
next time too. You'll get it
I
next
do it a
time.
lot less, right? I do it a lot less now. But the direction that I got was um, from somebody who has the same thing, right? And he said every day when those things crop up, first of all, make amends if you after you've harmed somebody, but what you got to do is continually ask God, if it's your will, please take this away from me today. Help me in any way I can. If it's your will, I don't know. Maybe for some reason you have me having this problem. I don't know. But so I have to just continually to ask God to help me. Please take this away if it's your will. Please take this away. Even in the face of doing these things. Because, like, I'd like to be like really idealistic and be like, no, I'll just stop. It's like, dude, you'd never just stopped. And maybe part of
Yeah.
you really likes the drama, right? Because, like, that is real.
Chad, not
That
you
is
or
real,
me.
right? I mean, as painful as it is, man, I tell you what, dude, there is times where if I'm really being honest with myself, there's a piece of me that really likes it. I
Yeah,
mean, I
man.
remember I was like,
I remember I said, I don't want peace. I used to say that. It's like I don't want peace. I want to go get the bad guy. I want to go get the enemy.
I
I ain't
remember when
wired
I
that way
was
either. It feels fake. Yeah.
when I was like 6 years sober. I remember this is right when, like, the Motley Crue show came out on Netflix. And one day I just found myself watching it, and there's a scene in there where Nikki Sixx is sitting in his closet in his mansion, and he's getting high by himself, and he's sitting there with a pistol, and he's like terrified and crying. And I'm sitting there watching that, and I remember having the feeling of being really attracted to that. Like, oh, I know what that feels like. And
Yeah.
there's something that's really, like, really alluring about the sickness. And like, so that's what we're up against. And so if that's what I'm with, if that's what sits with me all the time in some way, even if it's really, really quiet today, I have to continually go to God and say, God, if it's your will, please take this away and help me any way that you can to be the man that you would have me be, and your will be done. And then I have to let go of my opinions about it, because I'm already gonna beat myself up as it is.
I've become fascinated with deliverance ministry. Have y'all checked that out? Deliverance.
No.
Tell us about it.
So I guess it's like when you're wrestling with these things, I guess you can go. There are people who have gifts that can cast out these unclean spirits, and people. There's many people struggle. Like there's pastors, all kinds of people who struggle with unclean spirits, wrestling with powers and principalities, and there's people with testimonies about having like they'll like from firsthand experience. I heard one just yesterday where he's like his parents prayed over him with anointing oil, and he ended up, and this is after years of being a dealer, and I've listened to all kinds of crazy testimonies on that DELAFE testimonies YouTube channel, and he feels like he has to throw up, and he goes to the bathroom, and he goes to throw up, and a roar, just this loud roar comes out of him, and then he opens his eyes and looks in the toilet, and there's nothing there, and then he's like delivered. And then the thing is you get delivered, and when you have that clean house, sometimes 7 more wicked than that can come back. So you have to stay on top of it. But yeah, it was pretty wild, these testimonies about deliverance. There's a part of me that's really curious, and there's a part of me that's a little skeptical. But I guess there's some hope that kind of thing could work. And I see
it could work.
Abby's got
her hands up.
Yeah, to me, that kind of thing, I'm instantly skeptical. But then, I mean, hey, like, if it happens to somebody, I believe them, and that's great. Anything that helps people. But then at the same time, I see that as, like, a metaphor or an extreme statement of, because to me, evil spirits are patterns, or like angels are patterns. And that's the way that I think of it. And so what they're saying, or like for me, the way that I've experienced and would interpret having problems with an evil spirit is you have this pattern, like everyone was saying, that's really deeply in you. And this is what Ethics of Beauty talks about that I love, the first half before they start hating on gay people. And I've never managed to get past that part. I really need to read the last half, but I just hate it because it's like, damn, you were doing so good, and then you just have to throw that in there. But anyway, he was talking about like a lot of talk therapy, which I haven't had good success with talk therapy because usually it's on the surface level of like your conscious mind that's just saying, stop. Yeah. That's your mind. But what trauma does is it's in the body. The body keeps the score. It's in your body and your heart, and it's habit, and it's literally like in you. So what you have to do is find a way, or several ways, to rewire like so deeply your emotions and your body and like your habits, which I would consider to be the angels or the spirits that you're hosting, is your patterns. And ritual kind of does that. And I think he was talking about that's why like traditional rituals can be so powerful, because it's a full cathartic experience. And also I think certain types of therapy are better for that than just like talk therapy, like something that's actually going to have you emotionally process things. I think I've felt similar kinds of catharsis from that. But yeah, it's about like, because when you have a traumatic experience, that's an anti-theophany that like instills in you a vision of the world it's like the opposite of a revelation of God. It's the revelation of like evil. And that goes really deep into you. And the conscious mind can't really do anything to touch that. It just is like screaming at the body to stop. But these habits are like so deep. Yeah.
There's this story about that my good friend tells. He's older than I am. He's like maybe in his late 50s now, but he was raised in a Lutheran church, and like to the point where like they were going to like they were going to like clinics and marching out front in there, and he was told his whole life that if your name isn't in the book of the dead or whatever, you're gonna be you're excluded. He had his mother like got an exorcist on him. Like every week he was going up for altar call, and he was really earnest about this, and he just always felt like he was screwed and he was going to hell. And it was only until one day he like was what he tried. It was the first time he tried not to drink, right? And then so he drank, and he's like, what the hell, dude? And he talked to a buddy that he was working with, he didn't even, actually, it wasn't even a buddy, it was just a coworker. And the guy asked him, he said, "Do you think that you might be alcoholic?" And he's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And he's like, "I don't know. You ever think about maybe going to a meeting, whatever?" So then he's like, "I guess." So he goes with this dude. And it was from actually sitting with this other man who at one point was a preacher, who became a car salesman and an alcoholic, recovered alcoholic, sat with him and helped him to recover and helped him to understand, why don't you have your own conception of God? Like, why are you, haven't you ever thought that maybe your old ideas or your ideas about God are actually the ones that are binding you up, and the things that are blocking you? And so he tried this the deliverance thing too. So again, I'm with you. If somebody has an experience like that, because I think I had an experience similar to that, wonderful. But like, God is so mysterious that it's not a 1 + 1 = 2. It's bicycle equal, plus airplane equals, some crazy ridiculous, whatever. It's
Give it to
not
us. What's on the tip of your head? Give it to us. What does it equal?
right.
Steering
Yeah,
wheel.
it's steering wheel. That's it. Yeah, it's just, it doesn't. It's like, it doesn't make sense, and thank God for that. Because it can only make sense when it makes sense.
It's like, so I'm gonna be wrapping this up soon, but it's like the it's like what Rollins is talking about in that totalizing, not saving the appearances, totalizing your interpretation or your idea, or encapsulating it in a way that traps it in the closed circle of the serpent, where you can't have death and resurrection and new ways of seeing things, the further up and the further in of the spiral. If you can take a what do you the testimony, of these what do you call them, redemption testimonies, what are they called, deliverance testimonies, and you can take that and you can absolutize it in a way that becomes, Rollins describes it perfectly in there. There's a comment in there where it's essentially what I say when I say Christ and Antichrist are a hair's breadth, because they're so close. The reason Antichrist is deceptive is it looks just like Christ. And so you can take these deliverance testimonies, and then all of a sudden you can start creating a big system of this spiritual world where everything, like, all of a sudden there's an illness. Because I've heard these horror stories. My friends Sam and Sarah and I have talked about some of these, but where there are these horror stories of like, oh, your kid's really sick, and like, well, it's because it's a demon, and like, it's because you don't have faith that your son is not being healed, or like, oh, you had a child tragically die or something, and then like it can get really jacked up, really quickly. And that's not to deny the legitimacy of this deliverance stuff. And I agree very much with Abby that I think spirits are patterns, but I at the same time, and principalities, but I don't think that stops them from being personal or real either. It's kind of all the levels. So
Can I tell this quick story, just real quick, about, I want to make a response to somebody saying about smoking. This pattern, and it goes along with the pattern that we're talking about here, where you're trying to tell somebody, like, you think you're going to cast out the demon in me,
yeah.
right, by telling me I should quit smoking. I want
Have
to
you
tell
ever
you
just tried stopping, Chad?
Well, I mean, like, maybe I've never heard that smoking causes cancer. But
Have you ever
here's the
heard
thing,
Luke
like,
16:12 before, Chad?
so there's this story that I heard recently. There's a guy that was cousins with my wife's friend, and he was out at a wine tasting event, and there was a guy there who was like drunk, and this like really Christian-y dude walks up to this guy and says, "Why do you have all these tattoos on yourself? Why would you destroy your body like that?" He was really drunk when he was telling this guy like this. And the guy with the tattoos is like not drunk. He's like, "Dude, just like leave me alone, man." And this drunk Christian guy pushes him, and he falls and hits his head and lands in the hospital. And he's in there for 3 weeks. And he has 3 children and a wife. And he gets out he gets out of the hospital, and 2 weeks later he falls dead from brain bleed. So those of you who want to start casting out demons, why don't you look at your own? I'll try to look at my own too. but like, are you helping at all? Like, do you think that I'm stupid? I smoke a pack a day, like since I was 11. So I know what I'm up against. Do you know what you're up against?
Yeah. Well, I agree, Chad. That's well said. It's there's a weird again.
I
It's
don't.
the
I don't
Christ.
agree. I don't agree. So someone has to disagree.
Well, I mean, it's a. I understand what Chad's getting at because it's the road to hell is paved with good intentions, man. It's a. I think your story is appropriate because it's a we're all this weird admixture of truth and false and the implanted word and the anti-self unman who's seeking to destroy his own soul. You know, we're a combination of all these things. And so like, is there a part of this drunk Christian who is seeking the good of that guy? Sure it is, but it's also clouded with tons of like self-loathing and fear and hypocrisy and pride and fundamentalism and drunkenness, obviously. And so like there's just a lot of things going on. And Sherry often says this, and I think it's largely true, you know. It's take the plank out of your own eye. Don't like you shouldn't be trying to fix people. Jordan Peterson says this all the time. Like you're trying to fix people.
Well,
What if you're wrong? Fix yourself.
the
Like
cool
if
thing
you're
about the
wrong, it affects
deliverance
you.
stuff is the cool thing about deliverance stuff is like it's probably really important that you decided to go there and ask for help, right? Like if I go to you and just try to say cast out this demon, that would be completely different than you coming to me and say, hey, will you pray for me and anoint me? It's gonna be totally different relationship. You know?
Yeah.
To Phlebas's answer there, I think it's called mercy.
Yeah, self-emptying love would be my forgiveness for the last podcast. Absolute and total forgiveness of everyone and everything, including yourself.
Yeah.
I think you have to be humble.
Yeah, that's in
You
there.
got to become the footstool for the King of Kings.
Yeah. All right, folks. Any last words?
Oh, like I have also had an experience kind of sudden deliverance, and like literally just your classic epiphany. And the way that it went for me was kind of like everyone is saying, you know, it was a very sudden thing out of nowhere, like total miracle. But also, then after that, it's been a slow process of continuing to apply that initial epiphany to various things in my life and slowly working out those patterns. So like it's both. And I guess maybe you can have some times of having the demon cast out and like instantly things change, but then also it's this patient, slow process of maybe even like going to therapy or taking medicine or whatever. And I wanted, and in the early days especially, I wanted exactly like you were saying, I wanted there to be a certain method. Like every time that I'd feel that I was like further away from God or whatever, I would want there to be some kind of thing that I could always do in a routine that I could always go through that would get me back. And I was very panicked about it. But then God would say like, no, I can't do that because you make an idol out of that. It has to be different every time. You have to just wait and let me find you differently. And
let me put this in a formula I can control. And God's like, no.
we
Nope.
can't do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all. This was really great. Thanks for coming in and joining. But I gotta go get to work on all these other things, or else I won't be saved and I'll be panicked, and I have much to accomplish.
Much love.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Peace out, friends.